Welcome to our online course on the Product Certification Standard, ISO/IEC 17065. Although this standard is also used for process and certifications, these are only expansions using the same concepts for product certification that are embedded in the history of this standard. The most important thing for you to understand is that this standard forces the use of technical approaches primarily to ensure that the certifications are impartial, so as to help protect the health, welfare, and safety of product users in the jurisdictions where the certifications can apply. In other words, the standard is about public trust. Here we see the course syllabus. The section we're in deals with both the introduction and Chapter 1. Chapters 2 through 7 will have very few presentation slides. They will be mostly about asking you questions that force you to look up the answers in the standard. That is how you will learn what the standard is asking of you. In order for you to benefit from this course, you must have a copy of 17065 with you throughout the course. It will also help if you have a copy of ISO/IEC 17067 with you. The standard on how certification schemes are created. If you do not have a copy of 17065 with you, pause this course now and get one. You can continue once you have it with you. This is just a small bit of understanding needed for this course. The clients of the certification body are those organizations and persons who manufacture or distribute or sell or import or maintain responsibility for the object of certification within the jurisdiction for which the certification applies. As far as anyone is concerned, they are responsible for the continued conformance of that product, regardless of where it may have been manufactured. Whichever organization responsible for whichever aspect of the provision of the product actually applies for certification, they become the client of the certification body. They are the applicant. Now let's talk about the background and principles behind ISO/IEC 17065, the standard used to establish public trust in certified products. It must be clear that this standard is aimed directly at establishing public trust in the certified product, process, or service. Regulators will have requirements, and these are primarily to ensure the health, welfare, and safety of the public, including users of the product. No other standard has such a heavy focus on public trust.
First, let's look at how standards and regulations affect our world and our work. Both are created by people to ensure something. Regulations, especially technical ones, are to ensure the health, welfare, and safety of the people in a jurisdiction, like a state, or a province, or a nation. Standards are created to level the playing field and make things fair. Governments specify regulations and place them into law. Markets specify standards and publish them as requirements within a market. Enforcement agencies for the regulators then inspect for compliance to the law, while conformity assessment bodies will conduct conformity assessment activities against the standard. This includes inspection and certification. The penalty for not following the law could be legal action, or jail, or fines. The penalty for not following a standard will most likely be the withdrawal of the recognition of the conformity assessment body, such as certification or accreditation. Note where governments will sometimes reach into a marketplace and call upon a standard and cite it in a law. When this occurs, the standard's development and the conformity assessment activities will probably remain the same, but the government has now specified the standard under law.
Now let's look at how certification fits into a nation's conformity assessment infrastructure. Suppliers provide goods and services, hopefully conforming to the requirements for their customers and the relevant regulations. For many products, determining conformity is a difficult task, requiring specialist conformity assessment bodies. Obviously, customers want assurance that the conformity assessment bodies are competent to reduce the risk of receiving bad data leading to bad decisions, or that bad products are being certified. And that's where accreditation bodies come in, so as to transparently and objectively identify competent conformity assessment bodies in order to satisfy the demand for formal assurance of their competence. Finally, in the marketplace, conformity assessment requirements, including accreditation, can be considered an impediment to trade. So, imposing such requirements presupposes that a very highly technically sophisticated infrastructure is available in each nation. So, how do we overcome these impediments, which is in some cases technical barriers to trade in violation of the World Trade Organization's WTO TBT agreement? The only reasonable, cost-effective, open, and transparent way to overcome these impediments is through mutual recognition agreements among accreditation bodies and ensure that internationally recognized accreditations are available. Back to certification itself, in order to really create and maintain public trust, all these stakeholders must be part of the certification process. Those who set the rules, those who create the products, those who have an interest in the product and may represent part of the public, and finally, the users and the public itself. This list is contained in Annex A to the standard. From the list of conformity assessment principles shown in Annex A, here are the places in the standard, by clause number, where the principle is turned into a set of certification requirements. There is some overlap. Note that the standard and its principles follow different structures. The principles are the why, and the standard shows the how. If you do not yet have a copy of ISO IEC 17067, the Certification Scheme Standard, that's okay. The course handbook contains all the relevant extracts you will need for this course. The standard defines which organizations can act as scheme owners, what is required of them, what they are required to do, and what is contained in certification schemes. This is the list of requirements that scheme owners can create for the product certification schemes that apply to them. In a majority of product certification schemes, the certification body itself is acting as a scheme owner. That's not always true, but in a lot of cases it is. This is particularly true where scheme requirements are primarily technical. Note that scheme requirements can include what is needed for the product to demonstrate continuing conformance after the initial certification. This listing of scheme types is shown in the course handbook, but it comes from ISO IEC 17067. Note that any scheme from 2 through 6 will result in continuing surveillance by the certification body to ensure that the object of certification continues to demonstrate conformance to scheme requirements. Only Type 1 schemes do not have such a requirement. Here is a list of those certification requirements that must appear in any scheme for the certification of a product. This is the minimum list. This also shows the most common breakdown of certification activities. They are evaluation, review, decision, and surveillance. This diagram shows the hierarchy of standards used in the technical assessment of conformity of products. At the bottom, labs test and produce essentially objective results. In the middle, an inspection determines whether a product meets inspection requirements, primarily subjective. At the top, both of these inputs allow a certification body decision maker to determine whether the product will meet scheme requirements, and this is mostly using subjective approaches in making their decision, which are based on both objective lab results and subjective inspection results. Now, no lab can make a decision based on certification body results, and no inspection body can make a decision based on certification body results either. Each of these two processes requires their own independent review. For the lab, primarily objective. For the inspection body, primarily subjective. The biggest difference between certification and inspection, based solely on this diagram, is that certification makes use of both inspection body and testing lab results. Inspections do not make use of certification body results. With regard to the compatibility of the CASCO standards involved in certification, it's important to understand that all CASCO standards are compatible with each other. On this slide, these common quality system requirements used to be contained in these 5 publicly accepted specifications, PAS documents, but they've been withdrawn and the commonality of their considerations are now contained in an ISO-CASCO document that defines how CASCO standards shall be written. These are the rules for the CASCO committees. These rules are now part of a document called ISO-CASCO QAS PROC, PROC-33. This is a listing of the mandatory common elements that are contained in all CASCO standards. They're also included in ISO IEC 17065. Note that they are not part of ISO IEC 17067 because that standard is not an organizational standard. It's a technical one and deals only with the content of a scheme and the duties of a scheme owner. The resulting CASCO approach ensures that all CASCO standards are compatible. This includes, for this course, ISO IEC 17065, ISO IEC 17020, and ISO IEC 17025. In the world of standardization, which includes both standards development, that's the left of the dotted line, and conformity assessment, which is to the right of the dotted line, many national and international bodies participate in either or both of these subfields. For the technical standards developed within CASCO, whose members are drawn from all nations, the bodies that write rules on how they are to be implemented are the Technical Regional Conformity Assessment Cooperations, who are members of the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, ILAC. These are the organizations on the right side of the slide. For 17065, the overarching international body is the other one, the International Accreditation Forum. It governs how nations will recognize the accreditation of each other's product certification systems. This diagram shows how nations recognize the equivalence of each other's accreditations in technical conformity assessment bodies, and how these conformity assessment bodies can recognize the equivalence of each other's work, all under the International Accreditation Forum for product certification and the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation for testing laboratory accreditation and for inspection body accreditation. Within the International Accreditation Forum, there are up to 5 levels of recognition, each of which requires demonstration of conformance by the national accreditation body involved in those accreditations. Here are the top 2 levels. Level 3 is used for the recognition of specific types of certifications, and this is the one that most affects product certification accreditation. Level 4 does not yet apply to product certification. And Level 5 does not yet apply to product certification either. And this diagram is a summary of the levels of recognition provided within the International Accreditation Forum. It's also the last slide in this chapter. Next is Chapter 2.